Very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Friday Drinks. Hope you can join us in Harare. It's a little sunny. It was sunny in the morning, but it's getting cloudy. So hopefully the rains are with us. I think this week was a little bit rainy, certainly in certain parts of Zimbabwe, but it's improving. I don't know. You're the farmer. Tell us what's happening with the rains.
It's perfect weather for the farmers. I know Shumba there is grinning. He has never believed that I could be a farmer. I was just trying to encourage him to also venture into farming. So look, we always cheer the onset of the rain season, and this weekend it's been busy this week, going into this weekend, probably next week, and it's a perfect time for all of us. At least this is something that we've been hoping for. All the other things that we supposedly under our control, we failed dismally.
Well, we've had serious problems with ZESA, and part of the problem is because of the water supply in Kariba. So we are, we've got our fingers crossed that that will improve and electricity production will start again, perhaps in January or February, when the water levels have actually increased. So that's a big worry that we've had. We now have 24-hour blackouts. So we're going to get into that later on, but let's start off with what we're actually drinking.
Yeah, well, today I've got a fantastic gift. It's a single malt from the Highlands. One of our future partners.
The Scotland Highland is very different from Zimbabwean Highland.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So if you say Highland, in our heads.
Well, in the lexicon of whiskey aficionados, when you talk about Highland, we're not talking about the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about Highland in Scotland. So Derry, the chairman of Veritas Group, which is based in Mauritius, decided, he was enjoying the show and to gift us this wonderful bottle, which is a double oak. So it's matured in American oak and then finished in a sherry cask. So apparently it's.
Could you say that loudly? Who's the benefactor?
Derry. All right. His name is Derry, and he's the chairman of the
Derry.
Okay, let me see if I've got his full name here. Give me a second.
Yeah, this is the sort of details that you should know fully.
For someone who was gifted with such a
and this is an expensive
something that looks
it's an expensive
lovely.
bottle.
So Derry Thorniley.
Yeah. What's his full name?
Derry Thorniley.
Okay.
I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
All right.
So he's the group chairman of the Veritas Group, and it's basically
Veritas.
Yeah, Veritas. It's
they run a platform for investment. So they've got clients globally, clients who will be looking to invest in all the global markets, but also targeting mostly the African markets. So they've been doing roadshows here in Zimbabwe where they are meeting stockbrokers and asset managers to try and onboard them onto their platform, where asset brokers will be able to get access to his clients and be able to sell Zim assets.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Veritas. But just be aware, if you had actually sponsored our coffee, then I would have done a fantastic job of introducing you to our market. But since you didn't, this is what you get.
And I'm sure it's a kindred spirit. And
so tell us a little bit more about.
No, it's spicy and sweet, and incredibly smooth. I'm delighted, and it's actually quite sad that I have two teetotalers on the show today. So I'm the only one who gets to appreciate how.
Well, absolutely nothing wrong with teetotaling, and we're in Vumba in the Zimbabwean island, and we're gonna have some coffee. Yeah, and
so this is one chosen to be boring.
Well, this is one that it's the right weather, and I think. It's going to be a long night today, so I think this is the appropriate drink to actually have. I think I actually like this. We've been drinking this for the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, it's quite good. It's quite
It's
good.
one of the really good ones.
I've grown to liking it. I'm usually not a coffee person,
Yeah.
but obviously because of your influence, just as well, obviously you get to be influenced or to influence, just as well that it wasn't Shumba's influence on the whiskey and all.
Well, it's an acquired taste, and you've acquired the taste.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Yeah.
November is a special month, and I just thought, let's make it a history month of sort. So we've got a number of things that we want to cover. We want to cover certain things or certain events that have happened in November, and we'll have a discussion around that. Then we also have the ZSE, which has not kept up with inflation. And we hear, the textbook text tells us that the stock market is a store of value, but it hasn't kept up, and we need to discuss that. And you're the right guys for us to dwell into that. Then we've got the energy crisis and its impact on the economy, and we just need to discuss some of the numbers that are starting to come out, and lots of questions there. Then we obviously have a new regime in Botswana. And lots of excitement there.
Is that a correct
Yeah,
characterization?
regime sounds very, aggressive. Like there was
a regime change.
There was a coup or something or so.
Well, there was a democratic regime change. But I think the two issues that we want to focus on, that we've had the president of Boko of Botswana come out very clearly on, is the issue of De Beers. A contentious issue there, also given in light of diamond prices actually coming off. And then the other issue is Zimbabweans are going to get some exemption visas so that they can actually work in Botswana. Is that positive? Is it not positive? Is that likely going to affect how South Africa and other countries within the region look at us? Well, those are the things that we want to discuss. So let's talk about November. Just for context, for a lot of our listeners, this week I actually did a podcast for guys in Nigeria who actually watched the show, and it was good. And I think the important thing is we've got an audience that's
international.
Right across, international audience that actually follows what's actually happening in Zim. And as you're saying, you've got people who are looking at onboarding. Veritas, for example, they sit outside of Zimbabwe in Mauritius, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And they view the show. So I think that's very encouraging. So maybe a bit of background for our viewers who may not necessarily be Zimbabwean. So November is a special month for us because we've got, I think, 3 occasions that shook the market and changed everything as far as Zimbabwe is concerned. The first one, which was during the colonial times, which is in 1965. This is when Zimbabwe was still called Rhodesia, and the white settlers in Zimbabwe then declared their own UDI. This is a unilateral declaration of independence, sort of something that the Americans did in America.
It's very different.
No, actually, it's exactly the same. The only difference because it was what was the American independence? It was cutting yourself off from the Americans and declaring yourself
from the
British, and declaring yourself independent from the British. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what UDI did. It was cutting ourselves off from the British and making the nation a sovereign. But the difference is they still had allegiance to the Queen. So the Rhodesians say, you know what, we've now established ourselves as an independent state, but the president, so that's why Ian Smith was still a prime minister. Mm. The Queen still had...
still head of state.
Was still head of state. That's the difference. And then the governor at the time, I think it was Huggins. Correct me if I'm wrong. He was literally put in a house arrest or sort, mm-hmm. and they still functioned. So they sort of had a very uneasy relationship with the British, but they literally declared themselves. I mean, that was the inspiration. the whole idea of the UDI was inspired by the Americans, that we can have our own sovereignty.
Well, it was a very poor version of the American Revolution, because I think apart from them just deciding that they're going to be independent from the British, I think what's remarkable and important about the American Revolution is that they then had this idea, which they captured in the Constitution, of a nation, of a government of the people by the people, even though they didn't necessarily live up to the ideals of the way we see that today, but they had this broader or greater vision that the Rhodesians didn't have in 1965.
Well, it was actually more or less the same, because it was not the Declaration of Independence in America was not a universal franchise. It was
no, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and it was similar with the Rhodesians. The Rhodesians, the franchise was with propertied men, and mostly the propertied men were actually white. But anyway, the thing is, I just want to introduce, ours is not a political class. People can then do their own research. But the entire inspiration was the American Declaration of Independence. So this was the Rhodesian version of a Declaration of Independence. But obviously that then escalated the war with, then they were called terrorists, but these were actually guerrillas who fought the war of independence. So this were the black majority then decided to escalate and fight a bush war. And that bush war continued for about 14 years until there was a ceasefire, and Zimbabwe then became independent. So it's a particular point that is, or poignant issue that is still with us up until today, because certain economic decisions were made because of UDI. Because immediately the UN then had sanctions against Zimbabwe, and because of those sanctions, then there was an industrial policy called import substitution that came into being. There was also nationalization of a lot of assets. The important one being the pipeline from Mozambique that was actually nationalized during that period. Before that, it was actually built by Lonra, by Tiny Rollins, but post that, it was actually nationalized. So it's something that still lives with us 50 years on, 60 years on. It's something that lives with us, and the economic structure of that particular era is still with us. Then the second thing, and I just want to discuss them all in general, so I'm just going to put them out there. The second thing in November that happened was in 1997, 14 November 1997. What
14
we now
February. Thinking of Valentine's already.
Can you imagine? I'm almost there. But 14 November 1997, and this is what we popularly know as Black Friday. This is when the Zimbabwean dollar crashed by about 72%, and the straw that broke the camel's back was actually 50,000 disbursement for all the war veterans that fought in the war of independence. Remember what we said about what happened with UDI, and that then escalated the fight. So a lot of the black people were actually involved in a guerrilla warfare, and post-independence for many years, they were denied their pensions, and they didn't have enough in terms of compensation for actually fighting the war. So throughout pressures in the 90s, the government then of the day then relented, and in 1997, this was unbudgeted money. They broke the fiscus and they paid these war vets payouts, and that resulted in a crash. And like I said, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, because that was not the issue. The issue is when you look at import cover, so Forex import cover at that particular time was down to about a month or so. And usually we kept up to 6 months of import cover, but we then didn't have money because of bad policies in the 90s. In fact, Eric Bloch, if you remember him as an economist, put out a statement when the crash happened and said that, this is the result of 10 years of mismanagement. So it wasn't just a day, it wasn't just an event, but it was a process. So, but again, in Zimbabwean economic history, it's again something that happened in November and something that we remember. Then the last one is something that happened much recent, which was in 2017 and on the 15th of February, or in fact this week.
5th of November.
Of November. I keep on thinking
February, this guy.
I don't know what's happening.
And you guys are the teetotalers.
Imagine. So again, we had a coup. We had never experienced a coup.
Well, the coup that wasn't a coup.
Well, it's a coup. It was a coup d'etat. We had never experienced a coup in Zimbabwe. And for the longest, people didn't think it will ever happen. But after 37 years of rule under Mugabe, it came to a crushing halt. And thanks to the military intervention of 2017, November, again, it happened in November. So November is a special month. So I'm going to start with you because I know you're itching to say something. If you could just give us your synopsis and your understanding of November and these events, do you think that there's something that's there's a thread that runs through November, and then now and give us your perspective of the UDI as well as the crash in November 1997 as well as the coup, and what your thoughts are.
So I'm not superstitious. I don't think there's anything special about November. I think it's just a coincidence that we declared UDI in November 1965, and it's just a coincidence that the currency crashed in November 1997, and it's also just a coincidence that the coup happened in November. But I think if you think about our economic woes, they actually, as a country, I think we definitely started getting it horribly wrong in 1965, when it was a bad idea declaring independence unilaterally in the way that the Rhodesians did, and it kind of pushed the government of the day to get much more involved in the economy than you would ordinarily, in a free market. So you had all these government-supported import substitution industry that was built to circumvent sanctions. And that mindset, it seems to have persisted post-1980, this idea that it's the government's role to participate actively in the economy and driving, growth of various sectors like manufacturing, like agriculture. And because we had these policies, we've actually done quite poorly. If you think about Zimbabwe's economy in a regional context, in 1990, the Kenyan economy was smaller than the Zimbabwean economy. And today they're about 5 times our size. And it's not because they've had, brilliant economic policies. It's because we've, shot ourselves in the foot consistently, and the 1997 payout is another classic example of this. I mean, whether or not you believe that the payouts were due, and necessary, the bottom line is the state simply didn't have the money, and it was always going to be highly inflationary and highly damaging to the currency and to faith and confidence in the economy. So you had that Black Monday, and then things went south from there. 2017, I think there was a lot of euphoria. There was a lot of enthusiasm. I think a lot of Zimbabweans and people across the world thought this was an important turning point from an economic standpoint. I think within weeks of the change of power, there was a commitment from the British to make credit available. I think they organized 100 million with Stand Chart, which was unprecedented. So we had this phenomenal opportunity to turbocharge our economy and move in a different direction. And sadly,
was it another unilateral declaration?
I don't think it was. Look, I think to be fair, if you compare the two, right? What happened in November 2017 was as positive and optimistic as what happened in 1965 was as negative and pessimistic.
Actually, and because I've been reading David Coulter's book. He says that actually there was a bit of optimism, especially within the Rhodesians themselves. Obviously, he was young at the time, but he says 1965, there was a bit of patriotism, and it actually spurred the economy because the industrialists were like, okay, let's get on with this. Yes, we've got UN sanctions, but we are going to develop our own country, and production actually went up, and we've got the stats to prove this, that I think from 1965 to I think early 1970, production, everything, manufacturing actually went up. But let me hear your thoughts on this. Are you superstitious? So he's not superstitious. He thinks there's no connection with November, but let's hear your thoughts.
November is a sacred month for Zimbabweans. You know that Shumba. So, for example, you can't arrange marriage rites in November. So you can't have a wedding in November. And, whether Tizira or Tiziswa and things like that. You know that, right, Shumba and Mkanya?
Yeah. I know that.
Yes, I know that as well.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't know
maybe explain the background. Why is it sacred in Shona culture? Why is November
I don't
sacred?
know the backstory, but I just know this as a fact that you can't organize any of these important ceremonies in November. Certainly, you can't have the Kuroama Kuras also in November. So obviously, I'm sure the African traditionalists would maybe enlighten us on why it is like that. And so ordinarily, if that is the case, if it is sacred and you can't do all these major things, it just tells you that everything that happens in November ends up in
it's cursed.
It's cursed. It's cursed. It's cursed, and it usually ends up in a very bad way to whoever would have instigated it. So I don't know. So if you go back to those three specific dates and events, you just ask yourself, how did they end up?
Yeah, the counterfactual is, what if UDI had not happened? What if Universal franchise had actually happened?
So if UDI had not happened, it means Zimbabwe would have had its independence much earlier. Just like our neighbors in Zambia,
and Malawi.
But that was not necessarily a good thing.
No, I think that was it was going to be a good thing because it means we would not have gone through the liberation war that you spoke about.
True.
And you know how much the whole country has been held to ransom because some people went to the war. Credit to them, they did a good thing, but they're still paying.
True.
You were still paying for it. It also means by now we would have been at a different stage of our democracy, because we would not have this politics of entitlement that we brought this country to you or things like that. We could have had the politics of ideas where someone says, I want to be the leader because I can deliver this to you. It's not like, no, we deserve it. We did this for you. And even the whole violence around our politics, you can actually track it back to
CIO, Selous Scouts.
You can track it back to
a lot of these organizations were started
so Zim
around that
could
time.
actually been in a much better position had we not gone through the UDI. And even our relations as a country. I think the whole issues around tribalism or even racism, they actually got worse at that point. Yeah. When the Rhodesians were trying to prove that they could run the economy even without the support of the international community, and under pressure they were just inward looking, and by inward looking, it went to a point where you had to be white, you had to be a certain color class for you to participate and to benefit. So UDI was definitely not a good thing for us. I think you could some discussion can be made on the other.
So in November 1997.
Yeah, so it was a cursed day. November 97. It sort of So it's that was the point where we sort of announced to the world that we are actually entering into a crisis mode, that everyone could say, okay, it started. So whereas Eric Bloch was saying this had been ongoing for the past 10 years, the 97 became
we broke the damn wall.
Exactly. It became that point in time where you could say, for everyone, if you're saying when exactly did it become clear to all and sundry that we headed for a very rough ride, one would say that was the point.
Okay.
And all the things that we then encountered, including the chaotic land reform, it actually started. It has got its the base or the
genesis.
The genesis was actually from that point when the economic situation became worse, and maybe the government of the day had to do something revolutionary to assure
in response to what happened in 1965.
Exactly.
So if 1965 had not happened, and I think that was Shumba's point, then 1997
would not have happened. And possibly 2017 would not have happened. So I guess whether you are superstitious or not, but you can't ignore these data points.
We should avoid November. I think that he makes a very good case that if UDI didn't happen, then 1997 would not have happened, and then 2017 would not have happened. That's a very good point. But the point, what I would want you to maybe go in depth with is we just, maybe not November, because you're not a suspicious fella, but
superstitious.
Yeah, superstitious. Would you say that we would still have gotten it wrong somewhat because of the nature of the individuals that were there in Rhodesia? Is that, yes, they would never have done it in November, but they would have done something also stupid, and similarly with Mugabe, that, yeah, okay, you got it wrong in November 1997, but the guy's economics was so warped that he would have done again something stupid, and he would have stuck around in terms of power. That, yes, the coup may not have happened in November 2017, but it would have eventually happened because of the characters that are in our body politic. What would you say to that? That it's less about the sacredness of the month November, but more about the players at the particular epochs that would have just escalated the situation.
Yes, it's a great question, and it just depends on how you view history. So there's this view about the great man theory of history, which is that history is shaped by these larger than life characters who move the needle, who punch, well above the average person in their time's weight in shaping the narrative and the history of that time. And then there's just there's the opposing view to the great man theory of history, which says, there are these tides of history, there are these waves, there are these forces that are bigger than any individual at any time in history that actually drive historical outcomes. And it's just an accident that it's a particular individual that we associate with that epoch or era. It's just, it's because of greater forces. So really, your question, the answer to your question is a function of which version of history do you believe? Do you believe it's shaped by great men? The great man theory, in which case, maybe we were just unlucky that we
had Ian Smith.
We had Ian Smith at the time that we had him, and if we had a different personality, things could have turned out.
Before we had
an extremely different.
Very,
temperamentally,
very
philosophically, politically, so how did we transition from such a liberal to such a hardcore right-wing, personality? Was it inevitable? I think that's a tough question. I think to some extent, I believe we were unlucky. We ended up with this obstinate individual in Ian Smith, and
that begets obstinance from the other side as well.
Exactly, because you have this really hardcore right-wing personality that then inspires the hardcore left-wing personalities who had comfortable lives and good professions, but decided to dump all of that.
Yeah, Chitepo, Mugabe.
So at some level, it's academic because nothing we do or say is ever going to change the past. But I just think I think there's truth in both theories of history. That yes, great men have a role to play, but then there are these tides,
ebbs and flows,
the ebbs and flows of and I think so. Yeah, I think at some level we were unlucky. Things could have panned out very differently. But if you look at the counterfactuals, so you look at places where you didn't have that were in the same situation, Kenya. And you didn't have, well, closer to home, if you look at Zambia and Malawi, they also had decades of tyranny and awful economic, outcomes. So my view is that Zimbabwe at that time was just not ready for independence.
But I think you've already made the case that actually the difference between Malawi and Zambia is we were always 5-10 times bigger than them. And because we went through these wars, we are now more or less like Zambia.
Yep.
Zambia, we would never compare ourselves to Zambia.
Yes, we used to laugh at the Kwacha.
Comparable. Yeah, we were comparable to Kenya.
Yeah.
But I think that our trajectory was now affected because of these wars and because of the extreme characters that were involved in our body politic, which is the question I want you, Ranga, to deal with. That I know that Shumba says it's counterfactual and it's purely academic, but I think that there's a lesson there. And the lesson is perhaps we don't need to be extreme in our views and in the way we see the world. That maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe there's a way in which we can reach out to each other and we can forge the way forward without taking these extreme views that have to result in scorched earth policy, which is typical of our politics. Would you not say that's an argument one could make?
It is. It is. We are a byproduct of those two extremes. And you can pretty much see it even in the way we socialize, that as Zimbabweans, we are generally polarized. It's not easy and common and normal for us to have differing viewpoints without necessarily pointing each other or labeling each other. And each side actually believe that they probably believe they are more Zimbabwean than the other. Or
Zimbabwe owes them.
Or something, or they are more patriotic than the other side because of those two extreme situations that we have. And it has actually become a way of life for us. I don't know how we could possibly entangle or get out of that web because now, so we are talking of Ian Smith, Mugabe, and the 2017 group, but I'm actually worried about even going forward. You see that even the generations beyond that also have got that sort of mindset, and
the young Turks.
Yeah, exactly. So we are all hardcore. Just look at how things are moving or are sort of progressing in other countries, or except say Mozambique. Most of these places, even the Zambia and the Malawi that Rufaro was talking about, even when the tyranny and hard men, the culture of violence was not there. It wasn't really underpinned by a culture of violence. Maybe it was abuse of power or maybe corruption, but I think they still had sort of respect for each other as citizens, as fellow citizens. It wasn't really shedding blood and all that kind of thing. So we were unfortunate to have a character like Ian Smith and all that he represented, and we were even more unfortunate to have then the
Robert Mugabe.
Maybe not him specifically,
because Ian Smith begets Robert Mugabe.
Exactly, and that culture. So I want to look at it beyond Robert Mugabe, the individual, because he's not there. He's not there, but the
culture,
the way of doing things just perpetuated. And
I think I tend to agree with you, but I think that the way forward, and maybe we can then move forward. It's we don't have the ability to have a conflict resolution process. So in terms of violence, I think that, the Kenyans are violent, the South Africans are violent. But I think in those societies, they have a way in which they can resolve their conflict. We don't have a way in which we can resolve our conflict. So every time we've had, it's very easy for us to get into a conflict. But we don't have a way in which we can disentangle or move forward from the conflict. So if you remember, in 1965, the beef was with the British, right? Mm-hmm. That beef, Ian Smith actually wrote an entire book about that beef. He called it the Great Betrayal, right? Was that beef ever resolved? We have instances of the white farmers even today who still think that they can claim restitution for their land from the crown. Right? Mm-hmm. No matter how silly that is, the fact of the matter is it wasn't resolved. That conflict wasn't resolved. And similarly in the 80s, similarly in the 90s, we haven't resolved. We don't have a way in which we can manage our conflict. So if we look at 1997, November 1997, and the crash of the Zimbabwean dollar as a conflict, right? Then the question I ask you is, was it ever resolved? And it's up to today. We haven't resolved the currency conflict, because there was a conflict. There was a direct conflict. Something happened in November 1997. Oh, okay, it has crashed. Did we do a reconnaissance? What actually went wrong? So let's sit down as stakeholders.
I don't think of it in the context of conflict. I think of it in the context of ideology, right? And listening to you speak, one of the things that occurred to me, looking back at 1965, for example, is when UDI happened, the British considered invading, and they eventually decided against that, and they chose sanctions instead. And then the sanctions then made it necessary to have input substitution, to have this very strict exchange control, and all these other measures. But was it necessary for them to pursue that route? They ideologically, they could have just said, hey, you know what, guys, we think you're taking the wrong path, but carry on. This is not the way. And if they weren't so confrontational, perhaps the outcomes would have been different, right? Ideologically, they felt slighted as this great power, having this colony defy them, right? And perhaps sanctions was not...
No, they wanted to invade, but at the time...
They were stretched. They didn't have the money.
No. It was Keith and Kin argument that won the day.
No. It wasn't a Keith and Kin argument.
No, it was the Keith and Kin.
The reason why they decided against
that won the day.
They just looked at the cost benefits and said, look, this is going to be a hugely expensive and bloody
it wouldn't have been expensive. It was a Keith and Kin argument that won the day because the Rhodesian veterans had also fought fascism in World War II.
Yeah, but
so it presented a moral.
So some made that argument, but
anyway, this is not a history lesson, and we don't want to get down that rabbit hole. But the issue is, and I hear your point. Your point is there are alternatives that alternative ways right? that they could have chosen.
They decided to be very heavy-handed, right? They said, "Look, you guys are, out of order, and we're going to punish you." Mm-hmm. And I think that with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, that produced all these other negative unintended consequences. And perhaps they should have looked at things differently and said, look, okay, fine, guys, carry on with this vision, but we don't think it's wise. We don't think you're going to get the outcomes that you're looking for, and don't think you're going to be better off. Mm. And perhaps moral suasion would have produced a different outcome. It wouldn't have engendered the bitterness that Ian Smith speaks to in his book.
I actually think that what they could have done is they could have just, before UDI, because I think continuously, and Ken Flower makes this important point in his book, continuously Ian Smith thought that he could have a sit down with the British. He actually thought it could be resolved. That UDI was going to be a day event. So it was a way in which
and then they would kiss and make up.
They would kiss and make up. But the British then took a very snobbish snub and say, you know what, we're not going to talk to you.
Exactly, because they were a great power talking to...
which is fair enough. But I think that then, to your argument, is in 1997, again, the same thing happened. I don't think that the fast-track land reform, and the reason why it was called the fast-track land reform, there was still a way in which Mugabe thought he could negotiate with the British. So even in the crash with the war vets, there was still a way in which he thought he could still negotiate with the war vets. But my argument is, everybody, that's what they think. But because there's no framework, there's no institution of conflict resolution, then we just stick with our thoughts, and then this thing just escalates. And then the hardliners then take forward the argument, and then it becomes scorched earth because there's no platform. So let me give you a very good example that I learned from, it was Briggs actually who made this argument. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a very interesting one, which in our Shona culture we do have. And it's in Kenya, right? The conflict can be very bloody. Mm-hmm. And then the argument is, what's the conflict resolution? It's done by the chiefs, right? From the different tribes. Because they've been doing this for time immemorial. Mm-hmm. So they will then sit down and say, okay, this is what has happened. Mm-hmm. How do we resolve this? This is what you did, truth and reconciliation. Because that's what, what the basis of South African democracy and what makes South Africa a far better nation than us is immediately after apartheid, they had this truth and reconciliation process. That's a way of conflict resolution. And I'm saying Zimbabwe, even in our persuasions, we might actually want to reach out to the other party. But if there's no way in which we resolve. So in Shona culture, for example, if a husband and a wife have problems, right? And then Munyai is the one who mediates between the warring parties and tries to draw them together. Mm-hmm. But even if we can't be together, even if it then means that we're going our separate ways, there's a process and a platform in which that happens so that no one party feels hard done. And I'm just saying that in our body politic since 1965, there hasn't been that platform. We haven't institutionalized conflict resolution. So we always continuously find ourselves in this situation where we actually think, I don't think things will get bad. I don't think it will get worse. Mm. And then it does, because we think inherently, we think that there's a process in which people can reach out. There's a process in which we can reach out to the central bank and say, the military leaders in 1997, in 2017, thought that there was a way in which they could, apparently, from what we've read in books, the issue was they wanted a meeting, and that meeting never happened. Mm-hmm. And the next day, things just went south. So there must be a way.
So what are you proposing? What are you? Because we can listen to you.
I don't think we should indulge Tinashe's.
I'm only here to pontificate
because he goes.
I'm not here.
He goes on and on and on.
I'm not here to. I'm here to pontificate.
I think okay. So I want to bring a different perspective to the conversation, which is it's a mindset about, and I think a lot of the conflict around economic policy is this. Do you view the world as a zero-sum game, or do you view the world as a non-zero-sum game? So for Tinashe to do well, does he need to take from Ranga, or is it possible for actually Tinashe to do well, and as Tinashe is doing well, Ranga actually benefits from because the pie is getting bigger? And I think that when you have parties that look at the world from a zero-sum game perspective, it's very difficult. It becomes incredibly difficult to resolve conflicts because from the onset, I'm assuming that I'm poor because you've taken from me, and you feel exactly the same way. And it's really an argument about how do we allocate this limited pie. But if our mindset is actually, if we grow this economy, right? If we create a bunch of new wealth, we're
We're
all better off, right? We're much less likely to be engaged in conflict. And I think, and so if you look at the mindset or the worldview from the 1960s, it was imperialism. Might is right, right? You gained power and wealth by conquering territory and other people. And if you look at the ideology that funded the liberation struggle, right, the Chinese and the Soviets, their ideology was also a zero-sum game. We need to take the means of production away from this minority that's these imperialists who are hoarding it and redistribute it, right, to the plebs. And so as long as we're stuck in that zero-sum game mindset, we're going to struggle to resolve conflicts, right? We actually need to make transition away from a zero-sum game mindset to a non-zero-sum game mindset, and then actually see the potential for growth and wealth creation.
Very good point, Rivara. So let's go on to the next issue, which is the ZSE, which is the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, is not keeping up with inflation. What's happening with savers, depositors, pensioners? Give us the numbers. Give us a way. In what way can people actually keep up with Zim dollar inflation? Because clearly the stock market, especially the ZSE, where it's denominated in local currency. Give us a view. What's actually happening there?
The market is heavily controlled. And a bigger part of it, I think we mentioned it last time. I'm sure the crew can beam this chart that I have, and I can share with you here. So, markets like ours always benefit from foreign investment. And that has been the feature of our local market for the longest time. And as you can see from the graph, if it's being beamed, you can actually see how over the years we'd actually progressed from having almost 50% of activity on the market being supported by foreign money into a situation where, look at it this way, foreigners buying the ZSE is just 1%. Foreigners selling is 21.84. One of our best years probably was around 2014, yeah. And why are they moving out of the country? I think the biggest issue is around currency. So, you bring in money, it's not possible for you to take it back. And one of the channels that the foreigners have been using for the longest time, say, has been the Old Mutual route. So they bring in money using Old Mutual, and they would take out money using Old Mutual. So this was not putting pressure on the meager foreign currency, stocks that we had. So it's actually counterintuitive that the authorities actually thought, say, Old Mutual was bad for the economy, or was,
so they actually banned Old Mutual.
Yeah, so
it was actually
helping them. Yes, yeah. And this has sort of precipitated
So you're saying that there's just no demand for local stocks?
There's no demand. There's no demand.
What about the pensioners?
The pensioners, they don't have money. So look at this situation where so the companies themselves are going through tough times. So their cash flow positions are not looking good. So you could have a situation where they're actually deducting pensions from their staff, but they're not remitting because the deduction is an accounting transaction. The actual payment is a cash transaction. So you are deducting, but you can't remit what you don't have. And over the years, the situation has been worsening because as the economy is becoming informalized, it means the pensionable base is becoming smaller and smaller. So they don't have the money. to the extent that they have got money, especially the US dollar collection, they are not looking at the stock market as a good platform, given all these controls that are there. So you see a number of them trying to go into, say, property or doing some other things.
Why not? Why are they not? Because property doesn't have the liquidity that the stock market has.
So it becomes a value preservation issue. So you know the objective to retain value becomes more important than the liquidity. So they are not going there because they are chasing returns, but you are worried you've got some money. Imagine you've got your nostrils, money sitting on your nostrils. Would you rather keep it there, or you deploy it into an asset where you'll be able to at least realize it at some point? So that has been the issue. So there's just not enough cash flows or investable cash flows to be deploying onto the market. And the signal that we're also getting is the authorities are really not, they're skeptical of the stock market. So that's why suspending.
So they're not even promoting it.
In fact, they are doing the exact opposite. So you hiking taxes or CGT or withholding, and there was capital gains tax. We used to have a 270-day vesting period. So by today, you can only sell 270 days later. Otherwise, we'll punish you for doing that.
Well, but to be fair, that's gone. That's fallen away.
That's fallen away for now. You know, but even that, I can't celebrate it because all the other constraints that we introduced onto the marketplace are still there. And for as long as the old mutual issue has not been resolved, I don't see how our stock market is going to perform any better.
Would monocurrency help? If we had a monocurrency, would we suddenly see the ZSE doing better? Because then that becomes the only alternative, because you do have a big constituent in our market that's holding on to US dollars. No, so they were forced to hold on to local currency.
So the question is, if we move to monocurrency, does monocurrency come with discipline that we haven't seen in the last 20, 30 years?
Of course not.
So if monocurrency arrives tomorrow and the discipline is not there, then it's going to fail miserably and come apart at the seams. So I'm not a proponent of monocurrency. I think the government has a lot of work to do to demonstrate that it can actually be disciplined. And to be, frankly, they haven't done a great job of making that case. If you actually look at what's happening with the local currency, it's supposed to be structured. It's lost more than half of its value. So clearly there's a huge gap between the claims that were made in April this year when the new local currency was launched and the reality on the ground. So this is not a Zimbabwean phenomenon, right? Across the world, governments are just bad at managing currency. It's just we are particularly bad at it. I think that it would fail on day one if we introduced a monocurrency. So that would be a really bad idea. Already the formal sector is struggling. It's got all these headwinds that it's dealing with. I think monocurrencies would be the straw that broke the camel's back. It would literally, I think, destroy the formal sector, and I think we'd all be worse off for it.
Wow. Unless the monocurrency is the USD. So if you just go, say, full dollarization, it will give us stability.
Which is where we're going anyway.
It will give us stability, and it will take away the power of the state to print money. Because what we have right now is, the printing of money hasn't stopped. It's actually has been accelerated. And whenever money has been, they print money, put it on the market, they've got this, outfit that just goes around saying, don't do this. But that outfit doesn't have power to control the source of money, And what they've actually done is to make all of us criminals.
Yeah.
Out of
Sad.
yeah.
Okay, so gentlemen, I need to I need to. We need to move on. So let's deal with.
You're not a criminal.
Let's deal with ZESA. And I'm just going to read out something that was written by the Zimbabwean Independent. And kudos to the journalist who wrote the story, because it's a pertinent one, because we are suffering from blackouts, 24-hour blackouts, where ZESA is just not there at all. But this is what they say. Zimbabwe's power utility ZESA Holdings owes a staggering $430 million US dollars to Hwange electricity supply company, that's HESCO, which operates Unit 7 and 8 at the country's largest thermal energy plant. According to investigations by the Independent, the debt accumulated for unpaid power supplied between May and November this year threatens the continued operations of Unit 7 and 8. In 5 months, how do we accumulate debt with 430 million? Gentlemen, can you make sense of all this?
I'll defer to Ranga on this one.
I'm speechless.
Yeah. And we haven't started paying off the debt,
yes.
because the debt, we've got a 7-year moratorium.
I'm speechless because on the other side of the ledger, what is it that we were getting? That
power.
When we have not been getting power, I mean, so you're saying all the load shedding that we have been experiencing in the last almost 12 months, we're owing 430 million as a result of, so where was the power going? So I think that's the problem is some of the way we have...
I think it's probably the subsidized electricity.
Yeah.
Because it was operationalized. So HESCO was operationalized because they were supposed to then get money from the users. So the users are supposed to pay, and they pay through this SPV, and then they get the money. But now the problem is HESCO is US dollar. They want to be paid in US dollar. The customer is paying in local currency. So HESCO, I suppose, they're just charging us very punitive interest rates, because even in normal terms, I don't understand how in 5 months.
So which cohort of electricity consumers has access to power without prepaid meters?
Farmers.
There's your answer right there.
Even someone who has access to prepaid, the thing is you're paying in Zim dollars, but HESCO does not accept Zim dollars.
Yeah,
HESCO accepts US dollars.
Yeah, but I think where Rufaro is headed to is if at least we could have everyone pay for their power, right?
Even if it's at a discount.
Even if it's at a discount and in a zig. I think the extent of the areas that ZESA
would not be as much.
Would not be as much. We would then go to the next stage and say, okay, fine. We are being billed for power in this currency, and yet we are paying in that. So I think we need to do it in a sort of phased approach. But I know that ZESA is actually moving everyone to prepaid, including corporates. And they have been very aggressive in terms of trying to collect.
I don't think it will help. But
why?
I want to come in with a word of optimism.
Why are you saying it won't help? Because if the farmers, for example, are to prepay for the power, how would that not help?
Because I think that electricity is heavily subsidized. So even in Zim dollars, we are not paying what we should be paying. Because also it was very expensive to build this plant. It cost us $1.4 billion US dollars, and it's just for 600 megawatts. So it's very expensive. I thought, Rufaro, you were going to come here and say, this is a very good opportunity, an excellent opportunity for us to privatize Hwange. Because you know what? This loss is hitting now the taxpayer, right? So the farmers are not paying, but eventually it's hitting everybody. So we don't have access to electricity, and eventually we have to pay off the debt. But is this not a good opportunity to sell Hwange, even for $1, to say, HESCO, you seem to want to do this, and you seem to be good at doing this. Why don't we sell you take over the debt that we owe, which is $1.4 billion US dollars, as well as the 430 that we owe now, because this is now sitting on taxpayers. And then they start producing, and then they charge whatever they charge directly to consumers. then certainly we don't have this on our balance sheet, on our country balance sheet, and we can move on forward. I think this is a perfect time for us to do so, because also, we still need to replenish and rehabilitate Power Station 1 up to 6. There's a lot that still needs done. I thought that you were going to come in here and actually
look. I'm an advocate for privatization, not just of power generation, but of distribution, of every aspect of the supply chain. I think the state's only role, really, if we want to have an efficient, functional energy supply chain, is to regulate, right? To stop, abuses and monopoly overreaches and that sort of thing. But the whole supply chain from distribution to generation is better managed by the private sector. But sadly, we haven't seen.
But why can't we sell Wange? Like, give me a strongman or steelman argument on why we should keep.
You're
Wange.
preaching to the choir.
Why should we keep Wange? Because I can see the reason why we need to keep Kariba.
Why should we keep Kariba?
No. I'm saying yeah, okay, you.
So you see, no.
There's absolutely no reason why we should keep Kariba. But I think Wange is a good case.
Yeah, selling Wange.
Why should we keep
selling
Wange?
Kariba, I think it's good, but I think it's going to the extreme. It's going to the extreme.
Okay, so still mean the argument of why we can't sell.
I think there are other things that we can possibly do before we get to maybe something as extreme as privatizing these entities. For example, just look at ZESA, the way it's structured right now. Do we have the right people running ZESA? Maybe you can just start from there. I was just looking. I was looking at ESCOM. You remember the South Africans also had their own problems, and I think at national level, the South Africans made a deliberate policy action to try and resolve their problems, and it was central.
They're not building expensive power stations.
No. Let me.
Yeah, you can land.
Yeah. So they actually identified that problems were at ESCOM level, and I think I remember one of the things that they did. President Ramaphosa was to declare a national disaster. National state disaster or whatever on the issue of the electricity crisis. So what that did was to actually place sort of a direct focus on cabinet for them to resolve the power problems that South Africa had, including them actually appointing a minister specifically to deal with that aspect of electricity. And they made some changes at ESCOM, where they brought in some people, a team, some technical people, so engineers, people who know power generation, distribution, and all, the financial experts, and also people who had some experience in turnarounds. And they got in, they diagnosed the problems that were besetting the ESCOM, and started doing things differently. So for example, as the issue that we're talking about, like let's have sort of cost-effective tariffs as an example. Power prices in South Africa have been going. Have been increasing over time to a point that it affects demand. So people are only effective demand for power has sort of reduced, and because it's becoming more expensive. And then over time also they've been encouraging investment into renewables, private sector investment into that area. And, so when a private sector player is invested, they need to get a good tariff. So you want to have a good tariff and in the proper currency. So Zim, we've been talking of independent power producers, but the tariff is not good and it's not in the right currency. So those are some of the things that we need to do. We go all out, renewable, get private sector investment into the country, and then we get a tariff that makes sense. You can subsidize power up to a certain number of units, maybe for lighting. If you want power for your for your geysers, for other things, then you have to pay the top price.
Okay,
so we can do these things without necessarily privatizing.
Well, I think we have different problems. So the problem with ESCOM, it started because over 50% of electricity supply in South Africa was coming from thermal power stations. But government at the time, about 15 years ago, because of what was happening, the ESG, and particularly the move against coal, there was a move towards green renewables. But unfortunately, they didn't have the funds, and they didn't get the investments that they needed to push that. So actually, what has helped is they just went back to thermal. But they've also privatized, and they've also done a whole lot of other things. But I think we have different problems. Maybe let me articulate it this way, and then you can come in, Shumba. I'm saying that actually, even if you correct all these other issues, we now know it will go on for 6 months, and then it will go back to crisis mode. But when we're in crisis mode, we're accumulating this debt. The second issue is only 53% of Zimbabweans have access to electricity. And you're accumulating this debt, and this debt will eventually be paid by all Zimbabweans. Even those, especially in the rural areas, who have no access to electricity. Because this is now a national debt, and the national debt is paid for by everybody. And that's the problem I have. And I'm saying, why don't we privatize these losses? Because these losses are just going to grow. And if we privatize these losses, then I think we'll be able to move forward. Shumba, have the last word here.
So I tend to agree with you. We would be much better off if we just privatized the entire supply chain. And I think we've said this before many times. And unfortunately, my best guess is that the powers that be is just not the inclination to offload these things.
But isn't it what Mtapa was created for? Because ZESA is actually part of Mtapa.
That's another layer of bureaucracy.
Maybe.
Well, look, I'm not going to go into Mtapa, but what I will say, and I, because I'm an internal optimist, I want to end on an optimistic note. I actually think, it's unlikely that we see our government wake up one day and just decide to privatize all these assets. They've had,
but surely we can start with 7 and 8. We can. We should. I agree with you. So not just that. Do you realize that we have lots of thermal power stations right across all the municipalities in the country?
Yes, we have thermal coal across the municipalities. We have,
and we just need to privatize
some of the largest coal reserves globally.
Exactly. Let's just sell those. Let them be taken over by.
But we're obsessed. Our government is obsessed with control, and if I was to bet over the next 5 years, are we going to see privatization happen? My bet would be no.
So that's why I was saying, let's start slowly. Instead of starting with, Kariba,
everything.
But let's start with 7 and 8, because it's actually producing. They won't stop producing as long as they know they can charge correctly and they're collecting directly. But the burden is no longer on the taxpayer, and especially the taxpayer who is not even on the grid.
No, I hear you. Look. You're preaching to the choir, right? I'm sold on what you're saying, but I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think the powers that be are given to making that happen. Where I will end on a note of optimism is that it actually doesn't matter whether the state makes the right choices, because we now live in an epoch where there's a technology that is economically competitive with thermal coal, and unlike thermal coal, it's fungible in terms of ticket size. So, you can't realistically build a thermal coal power station with less than $5-10 million, right? But you can buy.
So the irony with your suggestion.
Yeah, it's not a suggestion; it's just a reality.
Yeah. But then the debt, you're still going to pay the debt.
No, the debt is not going away.
Yeah.
I'm not making the case that the debt is going to go away.
It's not that it's not going away; it's growing.
Yeah. Look, so we must continue to push for privatization. We must continue to push for prepaid meters and for the state infrastructure that's actually supplying power to collect for everything that it delivers.
I just say, let's just privatize. 7 and 8, privatize, because if we don't, we're accumulating serious debt. And this serious debt, it doesn't matter whether you're now on solar or your grandma in the rural areas. She's not going to pay this. Every time you pay your VAT, part of it has to go to paying this debt, even if you don't enjoy electricity. Gentlemen, I wanted to get to Botswana, but we don't.
Yeah, let's do it.
No, I want to give it. I want to give it enough time, and we've gone on for a while. So thank you very much. Enjoy yourself. Please share your thoughts and your ideas on what we're saying. Do you think that we should privatize Wange thermal station 7 and 8 that are actually now producing or not? What are your thoughts on November? And, as a sacred month, are we cursed because all these things happen in November? Please share and enjoy yourself and have yourself a wonderful weekend. We certainly are. Cheers.
Cheers.